There are all sorts of claims that come from the White House that you can just tell on a gut level are not true. Guns are the leading cause of death for children, for example.
Guns is the leading cause of death in our children. Guns.
What they don't tell you is that children means almost exclusively late teens of a particular demographic, specifically in urban centers shooting each other. It's gang warfare, but they want to twist it to make you believe that your kindergartner's greatest chance of death is a school shooting, or the repeated claim to have reduced the budget deficit.
We reduced the deficit in the first 2 years by $1.7 trillion in the first 2 years.
What they don't tell you is the supposed reduction is only with reference to the largest spending bill of all time coming off the books. See, when you compare to the most spending ever, wow, suddenly the gap between what we spend and what we take in shrinks just a little bit from complete insanity to something closer to just the normal outrageousness of yesteryear. And we call that improvement. And that is how they do it almost always. These claims are made with a very specific selection of benchmarks or reference points, comparing what to what in simpler terms. And amazingly, whenever you compare to the worst, things always look improved, never mind if the worst is actually their fault. And speaking of the worst, this is a tactic that makes the lie worse in a key way. At least a completely made-up lie can be attributed to momentary impulse, a kid caught in the moment saying his dog ate his homework, for example. But this is not that. This is strategic. This is calculated. This is intentionally sifting through the data for the smallest grain of what they want to say while ignoring the mountain of information that says otherwise. In this case, almost literally, the data actually form a mountain they completely omit. And it's not just the data they ask you to ignore, of course. This is the one context in which your lived experience doesn't count. Don't believe your own wallet. Don't believe your own bank account. Actually, the economy is doing great. And if your personal finances say otherwise, well, that's just you, because everyone else is just cashing in. That is what you're supposed to believe, and that is the intent with which the president tweeted on Sunday, quote, "Right now, real wages for the average American worker is higher than it was before the pandemic, with lower wage workers seeing the largest gains. That's Bidenomics. Real grammar for the average White House intern is way down, though. That's Bidenomics, apparently. But otherwise, that's great news, or at least it would be if it was at all true. If you're the sort of person who's worked an honest job in the last 5 years, you'll likely understand that it's not. Everything is more expensive, your wages have not kept up, and the increasing cost of necessities like food and energy puts larger financial goals like buying a car or a home out of reach. And it's not just your experience that'll say that, it's the data too. The only aspect of the average American that these people actually care about is that he's dumb enough to believe them over his own piggy bank and too dumb to investigate the claim for himself. The term real wages just means earnings adjusted for inflation. It's a measure of the buying power of the average income, in other words. So if you make $20 an hour, but a trip to the grocery store now costs $200 instead of $100, your real wage has actually declined because the power of your income to buy things has dropped. And that is exactly what has happened over the last 2 years. The buying power of the money that you earn, or the money that you've saved, or the money that you've invested has dropped because everything is more expensive to buy. So how is the White House twisting that reality to make this claim, to say the opposite, to say that actually you can buy more now than you could before, even though everything is jacked up to absurd prices? Well, that is the unfortunate fun of watching your country deteriorate. It's like a game. Some people do crosswords, some people enjoy Sudoku. Likewise, there's a satisfying puzzle to solve with every piece of Biden bullshit. So exactly what technicality did they exploit this time to try to make such a plainly false claim seem plausible. Very usefully, one of the better features of new Twitter provides a starting point. Biden's tweet got the instant community notes treatment, or at least it did, but that community note has now disappeared off the tweet. Draw your own conclusions about why that might be, but the community note said, just so you know, the truth is actually closer to the opposite. Real wages in March 2020 were $11.15 an hour. Real wages today are $11.05. That is a drop, not an increase. Click on the source provided, and it checks out. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Here's March 2020, real wages at $11.15 an hour, and there's today, $11.05 an hour. That's a 10-cent drop, and you'll notice there's quite a lot of movement in between, too. It's not just a steady, nearly flat drop. It's upward movement falsely inflated by massive government COVID spending, followed by a steady decline from a particular point in time. And that particular point in time is right about January 2021, when a particular president with this particular lie took office. So when they say pre-pandemic, they mean very specifically, do not count March of 2020, even though that's when lockdowns actually started, because real wages were still higher then at $11.15. Instead, go back to January and February when real wages were $10.99 and $11.03 respectively. Relative to that point, real wages have actually increased just barely. A White House official confirms to the Daily Mail that is the reference point through which they are making the claim, citing an economist who says clearly pre-pandemic means January 2020. But there are at least two major problems with this highly selective methodology, though. First of all, for what reason other than convenience for the preferred conclusion is January 2020 the appropriate benchmark? Even if we agree that January 2020 is the proper reference point for quote-unquote pre-pandemic and not when the government interventions actually started, wouldn't it be more fair to compare to what the number was when Biden actually took office? Are things better today than they were when he showed up? Isn't that the relevant question for any president?
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago?
And if that is the appropriate reference point, well, then the answer is certainly no. Real wages have declined 3% since the Biden inauguration, from $11.40 then to $11.05 today. In fact, they bottomed out last summer at a 4% drop, all the way down to $10.92, which itself was actually lower than their precious January 2020 benchmark of $10.98. And if you think that Reagan was mistaken to tell you that Biden taking office is the appropriate benchmark, fine, disregard him. But how about if Biden tells you that Biden taking office is the appropriate benchmark? Last week, the White House account tweeted exactly that. Hey, did you know that real wages are up 3.5% since Biden took office? On this claim, I have no idea how they were even making it, as the community note says the reverse is actually true. It's been a decline of 3.3%. So I think they posted this one, realized it's plainly false, and then just changed the starting reference point to something that makes it closer to true. And I say closer because it still is not. It is not a 3.5% real wage increase relative to January 2020 either. Even taking their claim at its absolute best, it's hardly any growth at all. If we accept January 2020 as the appropriate starting reference for some reason other than pure convenience, we have seen a whopping 6-cent real wage increase from $10.99 then to $11.05 today. That's a little over 0.5% increase. Maybe to really scrape the barrel, you can say that rounds up to 1%. That is the absolute best possible interpretation, which raises the question, is a 0.5% increase in buying power over 3.5 years really something to brag about and be thankful for? Or is that actually a pretty poor performance? Making it worse still, it's not even slow, steady growth to a modestly higher point. Instead, it was a roller coaster of massive false government-fueled gains followed by massive corrective losses because that wealth wasn't real. Like everything else these people say, it was just made up. So if you made your family budget believing the inflated earnings they created would hold their value, you're struggling. In 25 of the 27 months of data Biden has been in office, inflation has increased faster than wages. Sure, there are a few sporadic wage wins to find, but the overall trend is getting poorer, not richer. What do those losses translate to in real dollars? The average family is down between $4,900 and $7,000 in annual buying power, or up to about $600 a month. That is a major difference in whether you're able to make a large purchase, or whether you're able to handle an unexpected bill, or whether you have the savings comfort to invest for the future. So Biden was right in a way. Over time, that is life-changing.
I don't want to hear any more of these lies about reckless spending. We're changing people's lives.
And I know it's well beside the important point here that these policies and this view of government translate to suffering, or at least a drastically reduced quality of life, if you think that's too dramatic. But the last piece of the puzzle that I want to understand is who's actually in charge of making this propaganda? Because there is at least one guy whose job it is to pull these needles of supposed good news from the haystack of bad. And whether it's the economy or guns or any of the other priorities of the president, this guy figures out how to measure them with the exact specificity needed to say what they want to say. Of course, ignoring all methodological honesty and integrity otherwise. I'd say that's evil to the extent it's intentionally untruthful, but there is a certain skill in it. A certain skill that must be matched with a critical eye just as keen for their dishonesty as they are for their ideological goals. If not for truth, I just want to learn who he is for practical purposes too. Ironically, the White House propaganda guy probably is one of the few who actually did receive a raise in the last few years. And in fairness, he does appear to be a hard worker. So with the way things are going, it might be wise to learn his ways. In a tough economy, government liar is a great gig if you can get it. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.